Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we are continuing our reading of Village School by Miss Reed, and we are just in time for the jumble sale. At 7 o'clock, the door was opened and a gratifyingly large crowd swarmed in. Capacious shopping bags of every shape and color dangled from the women's arms. The first rush, as always, was for the children's clothes. Do nice for my sister's youngest. Ah, that's just right for our Edna for next summer. Always like a bit of frilling on the knickers for little girls myself. Hold up, Annie, let's try this for size. Pull your stomach back, child. How's the body to tell else? The clothes were churned over by busy hands, snatched from one to the other, admired, deprecated, and subject to close and searching scrutiny. Pennies, sixpences, shillings, and half-crowns changed hands, and the pudding basins provided by the vicar's wife on each stall were soon filling with the contributions to Fairacre Church Roof Fund. Prominent in the mob of women jostling for position was Mrs. Bryant, a tall, imposing gypsy wearing a man's trilby hat squarely upon her coiled, greasy plaits. Heavy gold earrings gleamed against her dusky cheeks, and she carried a formidable ebony stick. Behind hovered the lesser fry of her family, daughters, young wives, and a bevy of dark-eyed children who watched everything in solemn silence. Mrs. Bryant was known to strike a hard bargain, and when she approached the men's stall, where Miss Clare and I were struggling to find change for a pound note and sell waistcoats and socks at the same time, we girded ourselves for the fray. With the end of her ebony stick, Mrs. Bryant lifted a pair of gray flannel trousers. She gazed at the dangling objects with contempt and then said, "Give you sixpence for these." "The price is marked on them, Mrs. Bryant," replied Miss Clare, without looking up from her counting. "They're only rubbish, not fit for nothing but dusters," persisted Mrs. Bryant. "In that case, I advise you not to buy them," answered Miss Clare politely, handing change to a customer and not bothering to glance in the gypsy's direction. "Shillin'!" snapped Mrs. Bryant. Several of the women had paused in their buying to watch with amusement and also some admiration for Miss Clare's handling of the situation. "What price are they?" asked one, looking aloft at the suspended garments. In one swift movement, Miss Clare twitched them free, surveyed the ticket, and handed them over to the questioner, saying, "half a crown." There were sly smiles all round at this neat maneuver. Mrs. Bryant said, "Some folks buy any old rags I sees," and strode off with a face like thunder. Mr. Roberts towered above the throng, and his mighty laugh could be heard above all the hubbub. He was present in his triple role of school manager, churchwarden, and donor of the raffle prize. "How are you doing, Mr. Willett?" I heard him shout cheerfully. Mr. Willett was laboriously writing out the counterfoil of a raffle ticket, licking his pencil frequently, and, as it was an indelible one, gradually dyeing the edge of his ragged mustache a sinister purple. His tongue, by now, was an awe-inspiring sight and would have done credit to a prize chow. "Made 10 shillings already," answered Mr. Willett with some pride. "Fine, fine. You'll be able to buy one of my tickets for the Grand National draw. Come on now, Mr. Willett," said Mr. Roberts, tugging a book from his pocket. "All in a good cause, Caxley Old Folks outing." "Mr. Roberts," he answered with dignity, "you should know I'm not a betting man. It's the devil's work. I promised my old mother years ago, and I hope she can hear me now, wherever she may be, that I would never have no hand in bettin' and lottery." "And what the blazes are you doing with the raffle tickets?" demanded Mr. Roberts, trying to control his mirth. Mr. Willett's purple mouth opened and shut once or twice. "As a sidesman, Mr. Roberts, I hope I know my duty to the church," he answered with fine illogicality. "I'm putting my personal feelings on one side. The church must come first." "Well said," replied Mr. Roberts, "and I'll have 2 tickets for my own eggs." Mr. Willett's pencil returned to his mouth as he settled the book of tickets more conveniently on the basket handle. "In that case, sir, I'm sure my poor old mother would wish me to contribute to the Caxley Old Folks," said Mr. Willett as he tore out the tickets. And, fishing in their pockets, the 2 men found each a shilling and exchanged them with due civility. One blue and white spring morning, after the jumble sale, the sunlight streamed so temptingly through our high Gothic windows, and the rooks cawed so encouragingly from the elm trees, that I decided it was cruelty to children and teachers to coop ourselves up any longer. "Put your books away," I told the delighted class, "and we'll go out for a nature walk and see how many exciting things we can find." They bustled into the lobby, chattering busily while they put on their coats. I went through to Miss Gray's room. "This is too good to miss," I said, indicating the window. "Would you like to bring them out for half an hour?" We buttoned coats and tied shoelaces amid cheerful confusion. Then, 2 by 2, with John Burton and Kathy Waits as leaders, we took our excited family out into the spring sunshine. Mr. Roberts was laying a hedge with expert strokes of a chopping knife. He straightened up and smiled at the procession as it dawdled by him. There was a chorus of greeting. "Mornin', sir. Hello, sir. We's out for a walk. Too good to stop in, Miss Reed says." "Never heard of such a thing," said Mr. Roberts, trying to appear deeply shocked at this news. "No slipping out of school when I was a boy. Where are you going?" "I thought I'd take them down to the wood to see if there are any early primroses and violets. We should get some catkins, but I don't want to be too long in case the managers find out." Mr. Roberts' mighty laugh at this mild sally made little Eileen Barton run to the side of her big brother in alarm, and we left him, still smiling, to continue his work. Our progress down the village street was greeted by cries and friendly shouts from windows and gardens. Mothers, making beds and dusting windowsills, called to us. The toddlers, fingers in mouths, watched us round-eyed. Mr. Willett, who was inspecting a row of young broadbeans, waved to us from his garden, and we all bounced along quite heady with this unwonted freedom, feeling devil-may-care at having escaped from school and reveling in the surprise we were occasioning by our incursion into the morning life of Fairacre. We turned left at the Beetle and Wedge along a narrow lane that led to a small copse at the foot of the downs. Beyond the copse the lane rose, becoming narrower and grassier, until it petered out into an indistinct footpath on the bare heights. A fresh wind tossed the children's hair and the catkins that streamed like banners from the hazels in the hedge. In the dry, fine grass of the banks, the violets' heart-shaped leaves were showing, and the little girls searched industriously for the blue and white blossoms, holding their thread-like stems tightly in their small, cold fingers and sniffing at their bunches hungrily. Starved of flowers through the long winter months, now full of joy of this sensuous feast as it broke upon them. High above us, in a fold of the windy downs, we could see the shepherd's hut and the lambing pens made from square bales of straw set together to make a shelter from the weather. Now and again we could hear the distant tinkle of a sheep bell, and the children would stop short, heads cocked sideways, to listen. "It's my grandpa up there with the sheep," John Burton told me. "I takes his tea up sometimes after school. He give me this yesterday." Fishing in his pocket, he drew out a little boat fashioned from half a cork. By its odor, the cork had once served to seal a bottle of sheep disinfectant. 3 masts adorned it, and sets of paper sails and rigging contrived, I guess, from unraveled binder twine, completed the ship. "He give Eileen the other one," went on John, "but she floated hers out in the road last night, and it went down the drain." His voice was full of scorn. By now we had reached the copse, and some of the children sat in the shelter of the trees to rest, while others picked early primroses and anemones, or found other treasures, birds' feathers, oak apples, colored stones, or the large pale gray shells of the Roman snails that frequent the downlands. I leaned against a post and watched a tractor, looking like a toy in the distance, creeping slowly across a field. Half the field was already plowed, and behind the tractor wheeled and fluttered a flock of hungry rooks, scrutinizing the fresh-turned ribs of earth for food. They were too far away to hear, but their black shapes rose and scattered like flakes of burnt paper from a bonfire. Reluctantly, we returned, bearing our trophies with us, with flushed faces and tangled hair. As we turned the bend of the lane, I saw the school nurse's car outside our gate. Nurse Barham, a plump motherly woman with a Yorkshire brogue, calls periodically to inspect heads and keep an eye open for any other infection. I watched her as she parted locks and ruffled the boy's hair, keeping up a comfortable monologue the whole time. "Beautiful hair, dear. Keep it well brushed. Now your hands. Spread out your fingers. Nice nails, not bitten, I see. Don't forget to wash them before dinner." The children do not seem to mind being subjected to this examination. Only the nail-biters looked rather fearfully at Nurse's face as they proffered their stubby fingers for inspection. Nurse's main concern when she looks at hands is for scabies, but she is also a foe to nail-biters. "You don't know of anyone who could put up our new young teacher, I suppose?" I asked her as she worked. Nurse Barham knows the neighborhood well and realizes the difficulty of getting digs. "Miss Clare suggested Mrs. Moffat, a newcomer here. I don't know whether she'll be able to, I'm sure." "I can't think of anyone suitable," the nurse said thoughtfully, "but I'll remember to let you know if I come across anyone. I've met Miss Gray at music practices. She seems very nice indeed. Mr. Annett seems to think so anyway," she added mischievously, and whisked off to her duties in the infants' room. I felt vaguely annoyed by this last remark. Really, village gossip is downright irritating, I thought. The poor girl only has to be given a lift home by a neighbor, and the village has them wedded, bedded, and all the children named for them. It was too bad, and I was a little cool with Nurse when she bustled back. "Only the new little boy, Joseph Coggs," she informed me. "I'll go and call on his mother now. She'll be in." I glanced at the clock. Mrs. Coggs would be back from her floor scrubbing at the Beetle and Wedge, I told the nurse. "What sort of home?" she asked. I told her what I knew of the Coggs family, and she departed to Tyler's Row to see what advice and help she could give, and to leave a large bottle of noxious-smelling liquid for the anointing of Joseph's head. Miss Gray had liked the idea of going to Mrs. Moffat's bungalow if it could be arranged. Miss Clare, with true village caution, had advised us against going to Mrs. Moffat too precipitately. "Let me mention it to Mrs. Finch Edwards," she had said, "and let her sound Mrs. Moffat, then we can follow her lead." I was glad about this arrangement, for though I was willing to have Miss Gray at my house, I realized that it was not an ideal plan. We had to work together during school hours, and I felt it would be better for us both to have our leisure times apart. Our relationship at school could not be happier, and I did not want to subject it to too rigorous a trial. Mrs. Finch Edwards had approached the subject of Miss Gray's future occupation of the spare bedroom with some wariness, but Mrs. Moffat welcomed the idea. "It will be a help with the housekeeping," she said gratefully, "and I only use that room for my needlework and the machine. All those things could easily go in the dining-room cupboard." She pondered for a while. "And she's a real ladylike girl," she added. "Set a good example to Linda and that sort of thing. I'll talk it over with Len tonight and let you know tomorrow." And so it had been settled. Miss Gray had called at the bungalow and inspected the bedroom, happily picture-free, and admired the bathroom, a refinement which Mrs. Pratt's house had lacked, and which had meant 2 trips a week to friends in Caxley. They had discussed terms to their mutual satisfaction, and Miss Gray was to move into her new home in a fortnight's time with a very much lighter heart. Chapter 15. The Bell Tolls. 3 energetic little girls were skipping in the playground. 2 took it in turns to twist the rope, arms flailing round, while the third bobbed merrily up and down, hair and skirts dancing in the twirling rope. "Salt, mustard, vinegar, pepper, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they chanted breathlessly until the skipping child caught a foot or stopped from sheer exhaustion. The rest of the children played more quietly, for the spell of fine weather continued, and the spring sunshine beating back from the school walls sent most of them to the shade of the elm trees. Here they crouched, some playing with marbles, beautifully whorled, glass treasures kept carefully in little bags of strong calico or striped ticking. Some tossed 5 stones, red, blue, green, orange, and white, up into the air, and catching them expertly on the back of their hands before going on to further complicated maneuvers. These movements had old quaint names like Nelson, Crabses, and Lobsters, and involved much dexterity, patience, and quickness of eye. Among the roots, the little ones played the timeless make-believe games, mothers and fathers, hospitals, schools, and keeping house. Above them, the tight rosy buds of the elms were beginning to break out into tiny green fans, and in the schoolyard, the polyanthus, which the children here call spring flowers, and early daffodils and grape hyacinths, all nodded gently in the warm sunshine. Against the north wall, in the cool shade, Kathy played two-ball intently by herself. Her cotton skirt was stuffed inelegantly into her knickers, for some of the 7 movements of this game involved bouncing the balls and catching them between one's legs, and a skirt was a severe obstruction. She counted aloud, her dark eyes fixed on the 2 flying balls, and as she twirled and threw and bounced and caught, she thought about the examination papers that she had attempted that morning, papers that would decide her future. She had sat at her usual desk with only Miss Reed for silent company, while the rest of the class had taken their work into Miss Gray's room next door. She had felt lonely, but important, left behind, with only the clock's heavy ticking and the rustle of her papers to break the silence. But once begun, she had forgotten everything in her steady work. If this was the way to get to Caxley High School, with its untold joys and games, gymnastics, acting, and never-ending supply of library books, why then she'd work hard and get there. That determination, which set her apart from the other members of her family, whose sweet placidity she lacked, carried her triumphantly through the morning's labors, and when at last she put down her pen and stretched her cramped fingers, she was conscious of work well done. In all the schools around Caxley, preparations were going forward for the annual Caxley Music Festival, which is held in the Corn Exchange each May. Miss Gray and I had spent a long singing lesson picking our choir. It was not an easy task, as all the children were bursting to take part, but Miss Gray, with considerable tact, managed to weed out the real growlers with no tears shed. "A little louder," she said to Eric. "Now once again." And Eric would honk again in his tuneless, timeless way, while Miss Gray listened solemnly and with utmost attention. Then, "Yes," she said in a considering way, "it's certainly a strong voice, Eric dear, and you do try, but I'm afraid we must leave you out this time. We must have voices that blend together well." "He really is the tuneless wonder," she said to me later with awe in her voice. "I've never known any child quite so tone-deaf." I told her that Eric was also quite incapable of keeping in step to music, the 2 things often going together. Miss Gray had not come across this before and was suitably impressed. "When you think how hard it is not to prance along the pavement in time with a barrel organ," she remarked, "it seems almost clever." I handed over the choir to her care, as she was a much more competent musician than I was, and for weeks the papers on the walls rustled to the vibrations of "Over the Sea to Sky" and "I'll Go No More a-Roving," and the horrid intricacies of the round "Come follow, 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 follow me." This last was usually punctuated with dreadful crashings of Miss Gray's ruler and despairing cries from the children who had failed to come in at the right bar, battling against overwhelming odds, faltered to a faint piping, and finally finished with a wail of lamentation. The thought that this sort of thing was going on in dozens of neighboring schools was enough to daunt the stoutest heart. But Miss Gray, with youth and ardor to sustain her, struggled bravely on. One afternoon, while the choir was caroling away with Miss Gray at the piano, and I was watching the infants and growlers drawing pictures of any scene they liked from Cinderella in the next room, the bells gave out a muffled peal from St. Patrick's spire close by. The peal was followed by solemn tolling. Next door, the music continued cheerfully enough, but in my room the children looked up with startled faces, pencils held poised in their hands. On and on tolled the great bell, beating out its slow measure over the listening village. Out across the sunny fields floated the sound, and men looked up from their hedging and harrowing to count the strokes. In the cottages, housewives paused in their ironing or cooking and stood tools in hand as the tolling went on. 60, 70. Still the bell tolled, and little children squatted by back-door steps suddenly became conscious of a tension in the air and ran in fearfully to seek the comfort of familiar things. "Come, follow, follow, follow," the children's voices stumbled next door, and Mrs. Pringle's face appeared at the window opposite. I heard her in the lobby and went out to see her. "Forgot my apron," she volunteered. "They say poor Miss Parr's passed on." She stuffed her checked apron into the black shiny bag, and I noticed that her hands, wrinkled and puffy with her recent washing up, were trembling slightly. "I was in service with her as a girl, just for a bit, you know. She was good to me. Very good." I said I was sure she had been, and it was sad to hear the bell tolling. Mrs. Pringle appeared not to hear these lame remarks. She was gazing with unseeing eyes at the pile of coke in the playground. "Always paid well, too, and was generous with her clothes and that. I still got a scarf she gave me, mauve it is. Yes, never grudged nothing to me, I must say." Her voice faltered, and she turned hastily away to pick up the black bag from the draining board. When she faced me again, it was with her usual dour expression. "Ah, well, no good grieving over past times, I suppose. After all, if she couldn't afford to be generous with the lot she'd got, who could?" This uncharitable comment seemed to give Mrs. Pringle some comfort, but I could see that this seeming indifference, this harshly expressed philosophy, was Mrs. Pringle's challenge to something which had shaken her more than she cared to show. Her parting comment was a truer indication of her feelings. "Suppose we've all got to go, but somehow that old bell, I mean, it brings it home to you, don't it? It brings it home." As she stumped off, the black bag swaying on her arm, I felt for Mrs. Pringle, my old sparring partner, a rare pang of pity. Miss Parr's funeral was held on an afternoon as glorious as that on which she had died. The children had brought bunches of cottage flowers, daffodils, polyanthus, wallflowers, and little posies from the woods and banks, primroses, blue and white violets, and early cowslips. We put them all in my gardening trug, which was lined with moss, and Kathy wrote on a card, "With love from the children at Fairacre School," in her most painstaking hand, and we laid it among the blooms. Mr. Willett was entrusted with it, and he set off to deliver it at the house. As the playground was in full view of the churchyard, I decided to let the children have an early playtime and then be comfortably indoors while the service was going on. We had begun "The Wind in the Willows," and I thought, as I waited for the children to settle down after playtime, what a perfect afternoon it was to hear about the adventures of Water Rat and Mole. An exhilarating wind was blowing the rooks about the blue and white sky. Somewhere in the vicarage garden a blackbird whistled, and an early bee bumbling lazily up and down the window pane gave a foretaste of summer joys. Together, the children and I set out into that enchanted world where the river laps eternally and the green banks form the changeless setting for Mole's adventures. The sun dappled the children's heads as it shone through the tossing boughs into the schoolroom. Around them lay the sunshine, and within them, too, as they contemplated with their mind's eye the sunlit landscape conjured up by magic words. I was conscious, as I read steadily on, of ominous sounds from the churchyard, slow footsteps on the scrunching gravel, a snatch or two of solemn phrase in Mr. Partridge's gentle voice, blown this way by the exuberant breeze, and the muffled thumpings of heavy wood lowered into the earth. Very near at hand, a lark soared madly upwards, singing in a frenzy of joy, with the sun warm on its little back. It seemed hard, I thought, to have to be buried on such an uprushing afternoon. Out there in the churchyard, the black silent figures would be standing immobile around the dark hole. Above them, no less black, the rooks would be wheeling and crying unheeded by the mourners. They would stand there, heads down bent, with who knows what emotions stirring them, pity, regret, the realization of the swiftness of life's passage, the inevitability of death. While here in the classroom, sitting in a golden trance, our thoughts were of sun-dappled stream, of willows and whiskers, of water bubbles and boats. And I venture to think that of all those impressions which were being made on that spring afternoon, ours, for all their being transmitted, as it were, second-hand, would be more lasting in their fresh glory. Thoughts by a graveside are too dark and deep to be sustained for any length of time. Sooner or later, the hurt mind returns to the sun for healing, and this is as it should be, for otherwise, what future could any of us hope for but madness? And next time, I promise you, we'll be more upbeat.